alcoholic. Thank you so much for asking me to speak. This is quite a different format that I'm used to speaking in, being, online and everything. But anyway, I'm super stoked to be at a meeting. I'm not the best at attending meetings. And so I was really grateful when my sponsor sent me this link and was like, you don't have an excuse now. You can do it from the comfort of your own bed. So I got sober January 10th, 2011. I was 19 years old. I had no intention of getting sober. I had no intention of staying sober. I did not believe I had a problem of any sorts. My parents were the problem. The fact that I didn't have a car anymore was the problem. And I just needed everything to settle down for like a year or so. And then I could get back to, playing beer pong and doing, like blow occasionally maybe, or whatever the situation might be. So, I just... sorry, my roommate just walked in and kind of threw me off for a second. But so I didn't want to be sober. I didn't want to have a problem with alcohol. I was 19 years old, and to tell me that like I couldn't drink for the rest of my life seemed like a death sentence. I didn't know how to do life without alcohol or without drugs. And that's how I made friends. I didn't know how to make connections outside of that. So my first drink was when I was about 14 years old. I think I had just turned 14. I was a freshman in high school, and I got invited to a senior party, which was a huge deal and was really exciting. And I specifically remember taking two shots, maybe like one drink. And my eyes were rolling in the back of my mouth. My eyes were rolling in the back of my head. I was foaming at the mouth. I had a severe reaction. And I remember my parents sitting me down and telling me, like, Sarah, we think that you have an allergy to alcohol. And I didn't really quite understand what that meant. Like I was just kind of under the impression that, I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it was that like that registered for me to hear that like I had a problem with alcohol, or that I had an allergy to alcohol. I think more than anything, what hit for me was the fact that meant I was in trouble and that there were consequences, and I was afraid of this, and I didn't know what this would lead to. And I didn't know how I was supposed to go through the rest of my life, like with this new thing that I had just found taken away from me, like it had created like such an easy escape. And then all of a sudden it wasn't going to be around anymore, So, but I was scared. Like, I had this reaction and I was scared. So I didn't drink for about 2 months. And then I took my first hit out of a bong and I got really paranoid, and someone gave me a beer and they said, here, drink this, you'll feel better. And I drank it and I felt better. And that meant it was go time, So so being 19 and getting sober, that meant that like I didn't do a lot of bar drinking. I hadn't really accumulated much, so it was hard to lose anything. It was more so just these other consequences that occurred. And so sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. It was really hard for me to identify at first, because what that meant was that I would be... Sorry about that. It was hard for me to identify at first, because that meant that, I had to like look at these things that were, I apologize. I had to like, to identify as an alcoholic, like I had to look at these things in the book that described an alcoholic of like, getting things taken away from me. And like, I kept thinking of the idea of like, drinking under a bridge, and I didn't identify with that. That wasn't my story, but what I came to find out later is that this allergy that was described to me was something that existed for me. I had no control over whether or not I took more of what was happening. What I also found out is that like I had this obsession that occurred, that like I wanted to get loaded no matter what. And everything else came before that. It didn't matter what it was. It's just like, I wanted to feel like something else. I wanted to be somebody else. And I just really, really hated myself. And later that was explained to me as a spiritual malady, right? And there's all these like cliches that we talk about in the rooms about the spiritual malady and the God-shaped hole and all these different things. And like, I didn't have words for those before I came to the rooms. Like they just existed. And then all of a sudden, like people were sitting there talking about these things that like existed for me. And like, for once, like, I don't want to say like, oh my God, all of a sudden, like I felt like I was home, because that wasn't it. Like I was miserable. I was pissed off that I was in this room, and I was pissed off that this was my truth. I was really angry about that. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and I remember, I have no idea what was being said. I just remember the feelings. And I remember this overwhelming feeling of like, oh my God, this is my reality. This is it, and it was this lively room in Los Gatos called Young at Heart in San Jose. They had a crazy young people scene. They were always going places. And they were always laughing and smiling, and they were beautiful and fun and full of life. And they'd ask you your name and what step you were on, and like who your sponsor was, and how many meetings you were going to, and all this stuff. And like, I just wanted friends. I just didn't want to be alone. And I remember sitting in this meeting, and I remember just this overwhelming fear coming over me, and I started tearing up, and I tried to stand up when the meeting was over and bolt out the window, sorry, I'm like outside of my balcony right now, bolt out the door before anybody could stop me. And I got stopped by this woman, and she grabbed me and she gave me a big hug, and she said, "What's wrong?" And I started crying. I was like, I'm an alcoholic. She was like, "Yeah, we know, it's okay," and gave me this big hug. And I believe at that time I had a sponsor. I was living in an SLE, and we'll rewind a little bit. So leading up to like getting sober for me was, when I left high school, when I was done with high school, I really wanted to start over. And what that meant to me was going to the most affordable college I could go to, and that I got accepted in, and that was Chico State. So if you're from California and you know anything about Chico State, it's a notorious party school. And so that's where I went, and I lasted 3 months. And when I came back, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I had a huge breakdown while there. I had limitless amounts of alcohol while I was there. I had numerous blackouts while I was there. I'm a blackout drinker. And I always find it really important to mention the fact that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, because in our book, it talks about the difference between the hard drinker and the alcoholic. And for the hard drinker, when faced with a life situation, when faced with medication that's supposed to save their lives, they're able to stop drinking. It's a little difficult, but they can do it. For the alcoholic, they can't. And that was my story. I was told that my life would look like psych wards for the rest of my life if I didn't learn how to control it. If I didn't take these medications, if I didn't stop doing drugs. And I couldn't face that reality, There were 3 times in my life that I really wanted to die. One was before I found drugs and alcohol. One was right before I got sober, when I was told that I couldn't do drugs and alcohol anymore and tried to go without it. And then the other time was before I started working the steps and I was sober. So, I'm that alcoholic, and I have evidence that I'm that alcoholic, that I'm not just the hard drinker. And I love to remember that, because 7 years later, I'm still sober, and I've been able to do some really, really amazing things. Like right now, I'm at school at Berkeley. It's taken me like almost 10 years now to be on a path to a bachelor's degree. I should have an honorary PhD, but Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me that, I don't stop. Like, I just keep putting one step forward. There's hurdles and I just keep putting one step forward. I don't give up. Like, I ask questions, I ask for help. I look for the similarities and not the differences. I remember when I first got sober being really afraid that I was going to be chained to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I wasn't going to be able to leave my hometown because that's where my sponsor lived and that's where my friends lived. And I've been all over South America. I took a sailboat trip from Panama to Colombia last summer, and I was terrified that I was going to be around all these people drinking the whole time, and I was kind of dry. And so I called this woman right before I left, and I hadn't met her yet, and I told her I needed a sponsor and that I was scared and I was going on this trip and I didn't want to drink. She was like, yeah, it sounds like you need a sponsor. Like, we should probably start doing some work, and we did work together. And I didn't have service, obviously, because I was in the middle of the ocean on a sailboat with 10 other people with ice chests full of booze. And this crazy thing would happen where they wouldn't start drinking like in the beginning of the day, right? Because it was too hot and they didn't want to get too drunk. And they wanted to wait until like maybe they ate or something. And I just remember being blown away by this. Or they would like water down and mix their drinks. And I just didn't, like, it was just this reality check. Like, what do you mean? Like, why wouldn't you start drinking now? Like, you have the perfect excuse to start drinking now, but like, you don't want to, oh, that's right. Like, I'm alcoholic. I drink different, and I had that reminder. And it's like, the thing that rings so true to me is somewhere in our book, and I butcher our book all the time, I apologize. So either look for the passage on your own, or I hope maybe it reminds you of it. But it talks about we can go anywhere as long as we're in fit spiritual condition. And I have been able to live a beautiful, full life because of being in fit spiritual condition. And I'm not always in fit spiritual condition at all. I've done some things in sobriety I'm not super proud of. I've said some things in sobriety I'm definitely not proud of. But I haven't drank and I haven't taken anything to change the way that I feel. And I've told on myself. Like, I always tell on myself to someone, and that saves my ass constantly. So in January, I went back to Colombia because I'm in love with this country, and I had the opportunity and was fortunate enough to do so. And on my 7 years, I had no service on this beautiful isolated island, and they weren't even serving alcohol, like there was no way to drink on this island. And it occurred to me, like, if I weren't sober, I wouldn't be able to be here. Because if there weren't alcohol and if there weren't like drugs, like I would have no purpose. Like, that was my purpose in life. And so I got to do my first night dive, scuba diving, and we're underwater, and I was scary, but I got over the fear. And the diving instructor has us turn off our mag lights. And I'm on the Pacific coast, and we turn off our mag lights and we start flapping our hands around, and the entire water starts lighting up because it has bioluminescence. And I'm sitting there just like in awe of my life. And it's like that point in the book where it talks about how, like, I think it's in in the big book. And it talks about how, like, we look up at the stars and we're like, how could something greater not exist if like this is here? And so I'm looking at this like magical event occurring, and I'm just like speechless. Like, I'm speechless. And I'm like, today I have 7 years sober. Like, the day before, I was chasing some dude in Gilroy to try to help bail someone who wasn't even my boyfriend out of jail so that we could run away together to Canada, because that was going to be the better choice. That was my plan. We were going to live happily ever after, of course, like, no doubt about it. Pretty sure he was in jail for domestic violence stuff, but I didn't ask questions. That was my plan, like, left to my own devices. Those are my plans. But when I turn my life over, I get to be a student at Berkeley Like, yeah, I'm like 6 years older than everybody else, but I'm still learning and it's wonderful. I live in a house of 139 people in the biggest co-op in North America, and it's a sober house. It's an academic themed house. And I get to go to Columbia and I get to scuba dive with bioluminescence. And, sometimes it really annoys me at meetings when people only talk about the good things, because it's not always good. Like, there's been some shitty things, and sometimes I forget what I need to stay sane. And I get really lonely and I get really isolated, and I think that everybody's out to get me. And I feel really hopeless. The human condition, like, it's not unique to me or to you or to alcoholics. But as alcoholics, we feel it tenfold. And as alcoholics, our solution to it is to drink. And, to drink is to die. Like, that's what it is for me. So I hope you guys find this funny, because it's insane, but we're alcoholics, so we probably will. But I was getting trained at a new restaurant a year and a half ago, and I would wake up in the morning and we were going through the bar menu, and there'd be a glass of wine in front of me, and it was 9 a.m. and they were wine tasting so that we'd all have flavors, and we're sitting at the bar, and I'm at this new place, and I don't want to tell anybody that, like, I'm an alcoholic, because I don't know anybody. And I'm just sitting there, and my thought all of a sudden, my thought process, like, I'm resentful at the fact I'm alcoholic and can't, do these things, because I never drank like $40 shots of scotch or whatever. Like, I drank $2 Chuck, bagged wine, and vodka. Like, I'm classy, of course. And so they're sitting there and they're tasting this stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this sucks. I'm an alcoholic. Like, I can't do this. And it's like, this thought out of nowhere comes into my head, and it's like, well, maybe if I just kill myself, I'll come back, and in the next life I won't be an alcoholic, and I'll be able to enjoy this drink. And immediately my next thought is like, seriously? Like, that's how bad, what? Where did that even come from? Like, you don't want to die, And I told my sponsor later that day, I was super embarrassed, and I knew that there must be something incredibly wrong with me. And she started busting up laughing, and she was like, yeah, that's your disease talking. Your disease will say anything to get a rise out of you, try to get anything to work, as crazy as that. And I was really frustrated. I remember when I was doing that training, and I kept calling people and telling them, like, I want to drink. This is miserable. I hate it. Like, I was 5.5 years sober at this time. And I kept telling people, and I didn't understand, like, why this feeling wasn't going away. Okay, I have to stop talking in 2 minutes. So I didn't understand why this feeling wasn't going away. And finally, like, I was at a meeting and I was talking to my sponsor about it, and she goes, well, what does our book say about it? Like, it says we should recoil from it like a hot flame, right? And you're not doing that. What's going on? Like, why is this not happening for you? And I'm like, I don't know. I keep telling everybody I want to drink. And she's like, oh, so you're making it about you. Like, have you tried to help anybody else? Because that's the next step. We don't just share. We go and we help the next suffering alcoholic. I'm like, shit. Like, no, I'm not making it all about me, because that's what I do. I forget that it's service, it's all about service. It's about helping the next suffering alcoholic. And, sometimes that next suffering alcoholic isn't in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I never know when I'm going to come across that person. The longer I stay sober, the less quiet I am about my sobriety. I try to maintain my anonymity, but I don't always maintain the fact that I'm sober and I choose not to drink, and that I had a problem with drugs and alcohol. And you never know who's listening or watching, you just never know. Like, I've had people come back to me and tell me that they heard me say something to a newcomer and they applied it to their own life and it helped them stay sober. And so, like, I have to be this representative of Alcoholics Anonymous, I owe that to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. That right now too, right? Because I haven't been the best representative of Alcoholics Anonymous always. But that's my duty. Like, that's my ultimate form of service, right? Is to And like, with that, like it's practicing our principles in all our affairs. So that doesn't just mean like in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or in my bed on a Facebook, or this isn't Facebook, a Zoom chat of Alcoholics Anonymous. It means in all situations with all people. I just, yeah, I get to keep putting that spirituality first and remember that my duty is to serve. And if I like constantly keep that in my mind, I'm happier, and that's all I ever wanted was to be happier. Like drugs and alcohol did that for me and it stopped working. And now what does it for me is service and maintaining a spiritual connection. So it's just as simple as that for me, is seeking happiness. Thank you. I'm Sarah and I'm an alcoholic.